Hey guys, you've seen me talk about the Justice League in previous episodes, but today, we're going to look at a somewhat more obscure superhero team. A team that tries to be proactive in taking down supervillains before any grand damage could be committed. A team that still has merchandising contracts despite their believing in lethal force and not getting hunted down by the US government. Today, we're going to look at Youngblood. Who is Youngblood, some of you are asking? You might think that the answer to that question would lie in Youngblood number 1, since first issues normally lay out the basic plot, the main characters, their motivations, and what we might expect to get from them in future issues. Sadly, the answer is not in Youngblood number 1, since its creator, Rob Liefeld, thinks that the origin story should be in issue 0, while issue 1 should be all action. And since the first issue came out in April of 1992, and issue 0 would come out 8 months later, this got to be more than a little confusing. And because it's confusing, of course DC Comics had to do the exact same thing with their reboot in 2011, having the issue started with issue number 1, but having the origin story in issue number 0 an entire year later. Anyway, issue 0 is what we're looking at today, so that means no more confusion over who this team is, right? But sadly, we're immediately confused going into it, since this guy in the front, Shaft, is holding a bow and arrow which apparently has no bowstring. The reason it has no bowstring is because apparently it's powered by electromagnets. Which only begs the question of why Shaft doesn't either opt for a real bow that's easier to maintain, or why he doesn't just use a gun. And what's worse, the electromagnet thing isn't actually mentioned in the comic. I had to look at Wikipedia to get that very basic bit of information. Anyway, our comic begins in Washington, D.C., summer of 1988. Where we see the president being told about how Iraqi forces are about to cross into Kuwait. And I apologize for stealing Linkara's joke here, but I kinda have to since it becomes a prevalent problem in the entire comic series. In this first panel of this first issue of Youngblood, we see its first spelling error, wherein a U is included in the word Iraqi. Because poor literacy is cool. Also, I think this is supposed to be the first President Bush, but he looks way too young, and particularly sinister for some reason. And since this is taking place in the summer of 1988, you'd think that Ronald Reagan should be here instead. And yes, we are dealing with real-world presidents here, since we see a reference to Reagan in Spawn number 1. And Image Comics often pointed out in their earlier books that all of their titles exist within the same universe. Given the situation at hand, a SEAL team would be ineffective at this point, Mr. President. Maybe they'll be more effective at some later date, but for now we kinda have to shove them aside so we can show off our new characters. What options do we have left? We have a Youngblood unit standing by. Which squad are you referring to? Great. Not only are we seeing an origin story of a superhero team where they were already established in events prior to this comic, but there are also several of them. This is like Detective Comics number 27 telling the story of Batman Incorporated. All other Youngblood units are occupied in other disputes, leaving only one available that's apparently run by a Colonel Stone. They're a relatively new squad with some potential personality conflicts, but I believe Colonel Stone's no-nonsense approach should be effective for our purposes, sir. Unlike our SEAL teams who all know how to cooperate with each other and for some reason fight the enemy with Sudoku puzzles. And no-nonsense? Seriously? This Colonel Stone that they're talking about is actually this guy from the cover. Just for a minute, ignore the fact that no colonel would ever dress like a superhero when acting on behalf of the government. Instead, note the tiny skull on his forehead, the ridiculous pigtails, the bow staff that he never even uses in this comic, and the belt that's somehow attached to his body without any kind of buckle. Yes, this just screams no nonsense, doesn't it? But yeah, Colonel Stone and his Youngblood unit are deployed, and along with the spellings, we immediately see another staple of Youngblood comics. 2-page spreads that you have to turn on their side. And it's also worth pointing out that this comic is 22 pages long, and 12 of those 22 pages are devoted to this kind of format. You heard me. 12 pages are vertical 2-page spreads, meaning that over an entire quarter of this comic is completely wasted. They could have used those other 6 pages to include more story or character details, but nope. It was essential to turn the book on its side 6 times, because if we didn't, then we couldn't turn the book on its side 6 times. They are America's elite strike force, genetically enhanced to combat evil in all its forms. And yet we live in a world where Michael Bay is still alive. The best of the best, as Hussein and his army are about to find out. Oh yeah, apparently the Iraqi army isn't being led by Saddam Hussein, but Hassan Hussein. For a comic that's trying to be bold and edgy, you'd think that they wouldn't be afraid of insinuating that a real-life Iraqi politician might be up to no good. After Colonel Stone lands in a pile of giant NyQuil capsules, we see another 2-page spread showing Youngblood fighting the Iraqi forces. Or at least I think that's what's going on. We have this guy in the far background, and I have no idea who he's supposed to be since he's not wearing a colorful costume like the rest of Youngblood, and he looks far too white for me to think that he's one of the Iraqis. Then there's Colonel Stone, who looks like he either punched someone or he's about to backhand someone, although neither possibility makes any sense since there's no one in front of him. We've got this silver guy who looks like he's breakdancing with an Iraqi soldier, and then we got this guy who looks like he forgot to wear a shirt and apparently has freakish shape-shifting powers, his weapon of choice being his monstrously deformed knees.
Big knees! Good, let's go with it!
We've also got this moose enthusiast who looks like she's duking it out with a levitating gun, this guy without any legs who looks like he's attacking one of his fellow soldiers, and this skull-faced guy who I'm sure was meant to be drawn smaller than everyone else to give a sense of perspective, except since his leg is in front of this guy here, that only makes him look really, really small. Hussein's troops are great in number, but prove no match for the genetically enhanced power of Youngblood. And now we get to see what makes these Youngblood members so awesome with their genetically enhanced abilities. Riptide, Mistress of Moisture, can command water in all its forms. Looks like we've made a big splash, boys. Since they made sure to send someone who controls water, I can only assume that this little dispute is happening along the Iraqi Kuwait coast, or else her being here would be completely pointless and stupid. But if that's the case, why doesn't she just throw the entire Persian Gulf at them and call it a day? Chapel, cold-blooded killer for hire. He has the genetic enhancement of knowing how to shoot guns. By the way, you remember how I mentioned Spawn earlier? That Reagan reference isn't the only thing linking Spawn to Youngblood. Want to know how else he's connected with them? This guy Chapel? He's the guy who murdered Spawn in the first place. Good to know that this guy's greatest contribution to Image Comics was the unintentional creation of its most enduring character. Also, he's a murderer of U.S. Marines. Our hero, ladies and gentlemen! Die Hard, Genetic Superman. You might have guessed that with our lack of actually describing what his powers are, we don't really know how he's a Superman. Just take our word for it. Actually, I do know what makes him a Superman. He's a cyborg. And like with Shaft's electromagnetic bow, I had to look that up online to learn that, something which comic readers of 1992 were incapable of doing. You'd really think an important detail like that would actually be explained in the comic itself. And how exactly does one attribute genetic enhancements to a cyborg? And since we've seen these little expository panels devoted to each of these characters, we then cut to Colonel Stone, who just stands there awkwardly with no dialogue or narration boxes. I guess the comic just kind of forgot about what makes him so unique. And this is a minor nitpick here, I'll admit, but why are his hands outside the panel? I get Die Hard's fist breaking through the panel as he punches dramatically, or Riptide's water as it splashes out, but Stone's just standing perfectly still. After quickly dealing with a battalion of soldiers, Stone orders Youngblood to move on, but this guy, Colonel Boggs, thinks that they should instead check out the underground bunker that's beneath them, and take whatever supplies they can find. You know as well as I do, these tunnels are always filled with additional armaments and supplies for the other battalions. Why not surprise them and cut off their supply line? After we raid this one single bunker, the Iraqi military will have absolutely nothing at their disposal.
You magnificent bastard, I read your book!
Stone replies, because you failed to mention these tunnels are traditionally booby-trapped for unexpected visits like the one you're planning. The answer's still no. But because Boggs is kind of an idiot, he ignores this rather valuable piece of information that he apparently already knew, and goes into the tunnel with some nameless guy with a mullet and some Nerf guns. I should be leading the strike force instead of that fool Battlestone. He's too inefficient. Leaves too much behind. You know, just having him named Colonel Stone was fine and hardcore enough without giving him something silly like the rest of Youngblood. But Battlestone? Really? And also, how inefficient can this guy be if he's taken out an entire army in 5 panels? And Colonel Boggs, who remember is the more efficient of these two colonels present, promptly gets blown up in the tunnel that, again, he knew was probably booby-trapped in the first place. But the guy with shape-shifting knees, whose name is Gamble, but I'm just going to call him Super Torgo, managed to find a spare tank top off-panel and berates Battlestone for letting them go into the tunnel. He calls Battlestone out for not liking his authority being challenged, but if that were the case, he probably would have just slugged Boggs like he does to Super Torgo here. Battlestone, you're out of line. This kid isn't metahuman like you. He hasn't beaten death like you have. Youngblood, genetically enhanced to fight evil in all its forms. Except for that one guy who got killed and those other two guys who got blown up in a little explosion. Youngblood! There's no pulse. Stone, he's dead. You killed him. How dare you kill a defenseless member of our armed forces? That's my job, damn it! Another vertical 2-page spread of Die Hard running at Battlestone, while Battlestone's eyes glow for some reason, and Die Hard yells, "No!" Does Die Hard always go nuts like this whenever some pointless supporting character is killed off? Sheesh, I hope nobody ever shows him Star Trek. Die Hard clobbers Battlestone, and it's worth noting that in the span of only 3 panels, the comic breaks the 180-degree rule. But he's quickly subdued, and Die Hard and Chapel take him back to the States. It's at this point where we see 4 vertical 2-page spreads in a row, taking up the rest of the comic, starting with this one. Battlestone handcuffed in cuffs that are each roughly the size of his torso, and he's standing in outer space for some reason. Hopefully his captors will have him banished into the Phantom Zone. This court is now in session. Let the sentencing of Colonel John Helix Stone begin. What kind of insane parents name their child Helix? Does he have a sister named Sarah Parabola? On the next 2-page spread, we see Battlestone looking more like Lobo and gritting far more teeth than human beings are supposed to have. The shadowy court says that they don't want to have him court-martialed or imprisoned, but only to strip him of his rank and make him a civilian once again. Because that's the best thing to do with an overpowered freak who has no reservations about beating a man to death with only one punch, right? Battlestone blames them for what happened, for sending him into the field with untested operatives, but they insist that the real crime here is Battlestone's inability to exercise proper leadership. While I do agree with the idea that sending a bunch of people whom you already know have personality conflicts was kinda stupid, and while I don't condone Battlestone's actions, what exactly can someone do if their subordinates simply refuse to follow their orders? Anyway, all of this is rendered completely pointless with this bit of dialogue. As for the men, Boggs and Gamble, they were clones. We have no doubt we can replace them the same way we did you, Colonel. If they're clones and their lives are as replaceable as you say they are, why is Battlestone even on trial here in the first place? Battlestone gets all pissy about how they're playing God and artificially creating life and blah blah blah. This argument of authorities controlling life doesn't hold much water when it's being said by a guy who, again, doesn't mind killing people with his bare hands. They take him away, and we then cut to 14 months later, where we see Shaft from the cover finally making his first appearance, where he's appointed as the new leader of Youngblood. And they couldn't find a new leader in less than 14 months because... I mentioned how nonsensical it is for a government official to dress in traditional superhero garb, and Shaft seems to agree. Like it or not, that's one of the reasons you were picked. There are plenty of operatives who don't make the cut because they don't fit the image, which is something the program is looking to improve since the Stone incident. 2 things. 1, why do they need to improve their image? At the trial, they said they wanted to sweep Colonel Stone under the rug so as to not cause a scene. 2, how exactly will your image be improved with the love child of Roy Harper and Carrot Top? Shaft then meets the rest of Youngblood, and rather than have their characteristics be shown in the events of the story as they play out, they have to be told to us in little caption boxes. Storytelling at its finest, people. First we have Vogue, who is a Russian defector and an expert in all kinds of hand-to-hand combat. And she's made up like a clown for some reason. Then there's Die Hard. Again, no mention of him being a cyborg, only that all of his power levels are at 10, and he's the ultimate weapon. Then we have this Ben Grimm knockoff named Bedrock, later changed to Badrock. We don't know why he's a big rocky thing, or anything else about him aside from the fact that he's actually a little kid, because the US government always hires young children to go into dangerous missions on their behalf, right? Next is Combat, a Klingon ripoff who's also an expert in hand-to-hand combat, and has a power level of 8. making him completely useless since we already have 2 other members who are both better than him. And of course we know Chapel, hot-headed murdering psychopath with little qualms about breaking rank. Finally, there's Link, who actually has telepathic abilities. And because he has a skill beyond simply punching or shooting things, that means the rest of the comic series will barely involve him in anything that happens beyond this point. I'll leave you to get acquainted. Remember, they're as new to this as you are. Remember, there are already several other Youngblood units that the government has at their disposal. If they really wanted to make another Youngblood team, why not take some other seasoned Youngblood veteran and make him the new leader? But before they can get acquainted and have character exposition given to us in a more organic method, they get interrupted by the staff photographer for a few publicity shots. And the comic comes to an end as they pose for the camera, all looking like they really aren't going to enjoy their time together. Because this is going to inspire the masses, right? Also, later issues will try to establish Bedrock as a lighthearted, playful kid. And this is foreshadowed in how he remains as scowly as the rest of the team, even as he says, "Cheese!" And so that was Youngblood number 0. What did we learn about this team? Well, to be perfectly blunt, nothing! This comic was a complete waste of time. We don't know the events that led to the formation of the group. We don't know why they're even called Youngblood in the first place. We don't know if they were initially created by the government, or if they simply joined forces, and we barely know anything about these characters or why they'd be chosen to be on this team in the first place. I earlier talked about Justice League number 1 from the New 52, and how it didn't exactly read like your typical first issue, since it didn't do a whole lot to explain all of these new characters that you're seeing. But to its credit, you probably already know something about these characters in the first place, seeing as how they permeated popular consciousness. But this comic does not have that advantage. I know nothing about these characters, and nothing in this comic made me find out anything more about them, or maybe want to learn anything about them in future issues.
Now, seen for the first time anywhere are the original character sketches for Youngblood. Look to Hero for regular updates on this scorching new program.